the idea that government can tell people how far they can drive or shouldn't drive, or how often they can go outside or not outside, or what they can do in their businesses, or how many customers they can serve, and so on, could be reapplied when the next panic strikes. And the next panic maybe is not about a virus, maybe it's about a solar flare or something.
The business association Sakeliga has started contempt of court proceedings against Co-Operative and Traditional Affairs Minister Nkosazana-Dlamini Zuma, alleging that she has failed to meet a January 6th deadline to provide the records that she relied on to declare state of disaster pertaining to the coronavirus pandemic. Joining me to unpack this issue is CEO of Sakeliga, Piet Le Roux. Piet, thanks very much for being with us. Can you give us a little bit of background with this court case, where things are at the moment? Because it sounds all quite exciting, and I think for a lot of us it's good to see civil society trying to hold ministers to account for the policies that they implemented.
Chris, legal action, you should have a lot of patience for it to do it successfully. And this court case against Dlamini Zuma actually has its origins in December of 2020. It's not the only thing we did against the lockdown. We were, in the course of 2020, successful with various urgent interdicts against Minister of Small Business, Minister Ibrahim Patel of the IDC, of Trade and Industry, and so on. But this one took longer, this one with Dlamini Zuma. And this was because in December of 2020, we started asking for some records. The ministers were, and including President Ramaphosa, they were playing for time and using the obfuscation that they are able to sow with their decision-making to delay and frustrate court processes and our ability, and other civil society organizations, their ability to litigate. So we started filing Promotion of Access to Information Act requests. It was for Dr. Dlamini Zuma as the responsible minister for declaring the state of disaster, as well as extending it every time, as well as promulgating all the various regulations regarding what you may and may not do. We filed the information requests, and she kept denying. She kept the appeals. She also refused, and eventually we went to court. And in November of 2022, that's 2 years, we were successful in forcing the court order that she should reveal the records, and that's where we are now.
Piet, you touched quickly there on some of the other litigation that Sakeliga has pursued pertaining to COVID-19 and the associated lockdown regulations. Could you expand a bit on some of those details? Because I think it's important for citizens to know this process, as you mentioned, takes a while, but it's important to keep it, to make sure that you keep each and every minister to account.
Well, I mean, looking back at this over the course of 2 years now, everything looks much more potentially fightable in a court of law. But at the time, there was quite a bit of panic across the world, unduly so, but nevertheless it was there. It was sown by politicians, sown by irresponsible people with medical qualifications and so on, and just maybe even in the media there was a frenzy. And looking back at it, I mean, we can see that it was a complete overreaction, and the damage wrought by these lockdowns were multiple times the harms of the illness. But when we will live with the harms of the economic interventions and the social interventions and the monitored society for much longer than we will live with the consequences of the illness. Nevertheless, during that time, we still selectively pursued litigation. The two where we were successful, well, three, I could say, instances, when they started banning warm chicken, we started litigation processes. And I mean, that was such a clear-cut case that Minister Ibrahim Patel and Dlamini Zuma, they withdrew those regulations before we could be in court. So I could call that the first success. The second one was where we were not alone in that, others did it as well, but that's an example of litigation success. The second one was when the Minister of Small Business and Minister Ibrahim Patel of Trade and Industry both tried to introduce forms of business licensing. Minister Ibrahim Patel tried to do it through the CIPC and the so-called, the essential business process. And you had the CIPC, you needed the CIPC to say whether you were essential or not. And then you had Small Business Minister who tried to force municipalities to introduce a business licensing scheme. We were able to stop that. That was very important because even before Minister Patel, remember the days of Rob Davies, the ANC and the government has always tried to regulate businesses and make them apply for license before you can operate. And so it was an important moment to hit back at Leviathan as it was growing in times of crisis. And then, of course, there was the Dlamini Zuma Paper Information Act request that we're still pursuing. And then in 2022, I think, early 2022, we started that, of course, in 21, but early 2022, we were able to file papers to get the state of disaster set aside. And as that process was ongoing, we were also very confident that we would win. Under the pressure of us and many others, the government withdrew their state of disaster, and that was set aside. But then a very important danger also raised its head, and that was the making the regulations permanent as part of the normal health regulations. There was an initiative of Joe Pagla. We were able to stop that as well with an extensive case that is also still ongoing. We have not let go of either the cases against the state of disaster or of the health regulations, because any of those can be reinstituted at a moment's notice. And we've seen some of the recent panic sown again, unnecessarily so, by the Department of Health. So those are just some of the litigation that we undertook. And I think all of it has been very beneficial to businesses and society in general.
Piet, if I were to place you sort of on the spot and ask you to predict if a lockdown could happen again in the future, where do you see those sorts of wins at the moment in government? Do you think there's appetite for that thing? I mean, I would argue there's always appetite for bureaucrats and politicians to try and use the powers that they have to further their own ends. But from your reading of the situation, maybe speaking to your members, your contacts, that sort of thing, do you think we could be facing a lockdown again anytime soon?
I would be very surprised if we have a repeat to the same extent as we saw in the beginning of 2020. I don't think there's an appetite for this. We also see this in the feedback we get across society when we take initiatives against lockdown, against these mandates in all their forms. It's highly positive. So I think there's an overwhelming dissatisfaction with anything like a lockdown again. But the Department of Health, for example, recently tweeted that everybody should wear masks again, everybody should avoid crowds and so on. Just last week they did this. So certainly, it seems like government officials and some people with medical qualifications who are highly aligned with government, a highly statist mindset. Among those people, it's a small group in society, but among those people, there's certainly appetite for lockdowns again. But I don't think there's enough leeway in society for that. But the reason that is not enough leeway, and the reason they're not pursuing this, is because of the big pushback. And so we are going to keep turning the heat on them. And whenever they talk nonsense again about lockdowns, we will be there to stop them. It's very harmful, and it does not help anybody. But there is a possibility that the habits that formed during these horrendous 2 years, that was such an extensive power to people who should never be trusted, there's a chance that the habits that formed could metastasize and manifest in other ways. And I would not be surprised if the idea that government can tell people how far they can drive or shouldn't drive, or how often they can go outside or not outside, or what they can do in their businesses, or how many customers they can serve, and so on, could be reapplied when the next panic strikes. And the next panic maybe is not about a virus, maybe it's about a solar flare or something. So that's why it's important, because these actions, these one-size-fits-all, especially not only local state actions, but these global coordinated actions against a crisis that cannot be solved except with complete control by some hierarchy of statism. Those panics will come from time to time, and we should push back against them.
And Piet, if I may jump around just a little bit, because at the moment South Africa is experiencing stage 6 rolling blackouts. President Ramaphosa has said that he's cancelled his trip now to the World Economic Forum, so luckily our problems will be solved. But regardless, the work that Sakeliga is doing around litigation, around load shedding, in terms of holding Eskom to account, the government to account. I just wanted to give you the platform and the opportunity to discuss that specific area of your work as well.
Yeah, Chris, we've been litigating on the matter of electricity provision for quite a while, and some of our court victories have resulted in big benefits already for society and business especially. The largest one was, I think it was beginning of 2021, or was the Resilient case. And in the Resilient case, we acted as amicus curiae, and our arguments were instrumental in convincing the court that the Eskom should not be allowed to cut power to municipalities on a whole scale, just because the municipalities fail to pay the paying customers money over to Eskom. We agree that people who don't pay for electricity should not receive electricity, but the point is we can't cut a whole town like Lichtenburg's power, or Koster's power, or Malmesbury's power, or Nelspruit's power, or whatever, just because the municipality didn't pay. The businesses did pay, and many of the residents did pay. So we have two arms of the same octopus of the state fighting, and now the people who've already paid, we argued, should not be interrupted with regard to their electricity. So that was a big success, and that's one of the reasons many of the towns currently and businesses across the country are able to receive electricity if they paid their bills. But that, of course, does not solve the problem, because we still need to get the money to Eskom. So we have big cases in the Northwest where we are trying to introduce new financial control mechanisms to get the money from the customers, the businesses, and the other residents to Eskom. That's ongoing, and it's actually on an urgent basis. Probably later in January or February, we'll be back in court there. Then but that even doesn't solve it, because we still have Eskom in the mix. So we are currently exploring options in breaking the Eskom monopoly, the NERSA monopoly, and so on. That is quite complicated, because it's a habit for almost 100 years in South Africa to have the state provide electricity. So it's tough, but we also invite people who think that they have litigible cases to come to Sakeliga. We'd like to establish precedent, and we have a very competent legal team able to do so. So other options will be forthcoming during the course of the year, and we'll make announcements as we progress.
Thank you very much for watching. Before you leave, please a reminder to like this video. Also share it amongst your networks, your contacts, your friends, and your colleagues. Also, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you're not a client of the CRA, we invite you to become a client, or at the very least, try our free trial period, where you can enjoy access to our risk alerts, our weekly and monthly reports, as well as other analysis from myself and our colleagues. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.